Hello everyone and welcome to Paperback Journeys, where today I'm going to be talking about the 10 books that I read for spooky season during October. Which was my favorite, which was my least favorite, and then at the end we'll update the top 10 list to see if any of this month's reading made the list. And then after that I'll talk about the books that I recorded, the audiobooks that I recorded as an audiobook narrator. But let's get started with the first book that I read in October, and then I woke up, by Malcolm Devlin. So this book offers one of the most original approaches to zombie fiction that I think I've ever encountered. It's sort of difficult to describe this book without revealing too much, but in essence, what it's about is a virus that changes people's behavior, pushing them to act very aggressively. And they act aggressively even to those that are emotionally closest to them, like family members, friends, loved ones. And while not everyone is affected, those who are become a kind of harsher, more violent version of themselves. They don't completely lose all sense of reality, but they just become this really aggressive version of themselves. And I feel like if you're looking for a typical horror novel, then this probably isn't going to be for you. This isn't going to be what you expect, right? The story begins with the main character, and they are in a rehabilitation center. And much of this story involves him reflecting on his past actions, sort of trying to make sense of it all. And it's this kind of slow, thoughtful, retrospective exploration of guilt and redemption, and how a skewed view of reality can just transform us into something monstrous. It is a really quick read. So if you're, I'm not sure, I don't know. It's not like a big gamble for you, It's not like this big endeavor, this big mountain that you have to climb. However, if you're after, like I say, traditional horror, it's just not going to deliver for you. So if you're interested, though, in a fresh perspective on the zombie genre, give it a look. All right, anyway, enough about that one. Next up is something that also is a bit of a subversion of the usual horror tropes, and that is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. I like this. I really enjoyed it. Right from the start, the book just immerses you in Robert Neville's world as he navigates life as the last man in a vampire-infested world. And the story kind of shifts between his past and his present, and it shows just how drastically his life has changed. It's definitely not, it's a vampire story, right? So, but it's not your typical vampire story, I wouldn't say. Neville's daily struggles for survival kind of feel genuine. His routine of fortifying his home and approaching vampire hunting feels like a chore that he has to do, like waking up and going to work. Oh man, I got to do this again, so yeah, it feels like a chore rather than this epic showdown between man and monster. But what I think really stood out about the book is the kind of like intense loneliness and the weight of isolation that he endures, his yearning for human connection. I think it really hits home, especially when you see the contrast of how his life once was. So yeah, it's a bit of a tragedy in that sense as well, when it kind of goes into his past and the fallout and the build up to that moment. The vampires here also have a bit of a different vibe from most. they're more like a blend of vampire and zombie, similar to creatures in Salem's Lot, but they're not quite as zombified as they are in the Will Smith movie. I haven't seen the original movie, right? But the Will Smith movie, I Am Legend, they really felt like zombies. I didn't even remember thinking of them as vampires at all. These aren't quite to that level, you know, where they're just sort of like these fast Walking Dead zombies. It's not like that. They're yeah, they're more vampiric, but yeah, I'd say they're sort of right in the middle between vampire and zombie, with some of them having a bit more of an idea of what's going on than others are, you know? So yeah, very Salem's Lot-esque. And there are actually, I would say, quite a few differences between the book and the movie. So if you've seen the movie, you're still going to be able to enjoy enjoy this. I know that the movie actually had like two different endings. I think I'm not going to give any spoilers, but you know, it's yeah, it's different. It's different. It's different. Next up is the next book that I read was Carrie by Stephen King. So I've been a Stephen King reader for a little while now. You know, I've got some books under my belt, and so going back to Carrie, which is, you know, one of his early works. I think it was his first published novel. I think it was. I was kind of curious to see how his style had evolved, and the story centers on Carrie, who is this shy high school girl who's just relentlessly bullied by her classmates, and she's oppressed by her intensely religious mother. And then she discovers that she has telekinetic abilities, and then everything builds up to this like terrifying moment. I a lot of you will already know this, but just in case you don't, you might have seen the movie or whatever. I never saw the movie, but yeah, it sort of like builds up to this sort of terrifying moment where all of this chaos unfolds, you know. And the portrayal, I think, of high school life and bullying just feels so brutally realistic. I was kind of like fortunate enough that I didn't have to face much bullying at school. I think I was kind of like, I'll be honest with you. I'll be like completely open with you. I think I was sort of seen as like the psycho kid in my school. I definitely was never a bully. I never, ever, ever bullied anyone. Never once in my life have I bullied anyone. But yeah, I was sort of like I don't know, yeah, kind of a little bit unusual, I suppose. I had a little bit of a temper at school, you know, like, and I sort of, you know, normal teenage boy stuff. I had a bit of difficulty with my emotions and things like that. I'm much more chilled out and friendly now, as I hope you can tell. But you know, I had friends and family who I know were bullied, and I know that, you know, bullying can make school feel just like this endless nightmare. So King, I think, really nailed that fear of like embarrassment and rejection from your peers. I couldn't. I really felt for her, you know, and I think anyone would reading this. And the suspense just before, you know, this big event that the whole story kind of centers around as it goes back and forward in time. You can sense, you know, something awful is approaching. I also really enjoyed the epistolary style that Stephen King used in the story. You get these little news articles here and there where they're talking about, you know, this event that happened, and all of these police reports and everything like that. Yeah, it was great. So on the downside, I would say that the supporting characters didn't really stand out to me as much as they usually do in Stephen King books. Normally, he's just got this incredible cast of characters that are so richly developed. I think Carrie and her mother were the only two characters that I was fully invested in, while all of the others just sort of, you know, they were just sort of fading into the background, honestly. Now that I've finished this book, though, I think that I'm ready to release my complete Stephen King ranking on my YouTube channel, which I really look forward to doing. I don't know how many Stephen King books I've read, maybe 30 something, maybe 40. I don't know. I'll have to count. Oh, and I'm also at the moment reading Running Man as well. So I'll probably just finish that one, and then I'll get into the ranking, the tier list. This isn't my favorite Stephen King book, but you know, I thought it was solid. Okay, so book number 4 that I read in spooky season was The Haar by David Sodergren. This book is so funny, you know, because it had a kind of a Stephen King vibe in a sense, but it was as if he and Frederick Buckman from, do you know, a man called a man called Uwe and Beartown. You know, he's that wholesome Swedish writer. Yeah, it was like those two sat down and collaborated to create this. That's the David Sodergren vibe, I guess. And this was my first experience of what I can only describe as wholesome horror. In this book, we follow the main character, this old Scottish lady named Muriel Macaulay, who has lived her whole life in this Scottish village of Witch Haven. And then a developer moves in to evict all of the elderly residents that have built this lovely little cozy community in Scotland. But that's when the Haar rolls in. And the Haar is like this thick fog that comes into the coast of Scotland and northern England as well. They up north they call it the Haar, right? And with it, it brings this this sort of strange and supernatural forces. And so Muriel has to determine whether these forces are allies or enemies, as she has to fight to protect her home from these rich elitist developers. The fear that it's playing with is like the fear of aging and the fear of being replaced. And it kind of captures that unsettling feeling of watching younger generations with their new music and their cultural references and their values, almost like a kind of like an alien invasion, encroach into your life, you know? And now you see yourself being sort of replaced by the younger generation that are coming in, you know? And it's not something that I've ever thought about. I mean, I'm coming up to 40, right? I'm 39 now, right? I know, like, look at the state of me. Look what life has done to me. It was sort of tough, you know, to see these once important figures in the community that they've carved out for themselves start to look a little bit outdated and, you know, through no fault of their own, become powerless, and all of their independence sort of slipping away against the tide of time. You know, it was just, it was a bit sad, really. But I think what makes this theme so relatable is that nearly everyone will face ageism in some way at some point. But it's not just about old versus young. It's also about the kind of wealth disparities as well, like the rich versus the poor. It's all these kind of like power dynamics that are coming into play. I just felt like the village setting, blanketed in fog, was so brilliantly depicted. I could almost sort of feel that cold mist on my skin, you know? And even with the ominous atmosphere, there were like light-hearted moments that made the characters all feel really relatable and human. The ending was satisfying, and I thought it kind of brought the story together really well. And Muriel in particular was a character that I just found so easy to root for. The one thing I would say that, you know, maybe I didn't like is that the characters came across at times like caricatures of evil, and it made them easy to dislike. I mean, you disliked them immediately, but it was almost like, wow, they're too evil. You know, like they're coming out the gate like, oh, by the way, you know, we're the bad guys, you know. So I I thought that they might try and hide that they were evil in some way, but no, they're just like, no, we're straight up villains. The next book that I read for spooky season was The Troop by Nick Cutter, and I think the way that I described this on Goodreads, by the way, if you don't follow me on Goodreads, just links below. Do you know what I mean? Get on it. But yeah, I thought of this as like Lord of the Flies on acid. The story centers on a group of Boy Scouts that are all on this camping trip on a remote Canadian island where they encounter this man who's been infected with this gruesome, deadly disease where his hunger cannot be satiated. No matter what he does, no matter what he consumes, to the point where he's picking up clods of dirt and just sticking them in his mouth just to fill his stomach with something. This is highly contagious. And so as the infection starts to spread, the boys are kind of forced to face not only this terrifying physical threat, but also the dark sides of their own nature. We find out things about some of these boys which are a little bit unsavory, maybe. Not everyone's exactly as they appear to be. And I think that this might be the most intense body horror that I've ever read. It's just incredibly graphic. And just when I thought I was becoming like desensitized to it, I was thinking, yeah, all right, I've sort of reached the peak now. Nothing else can shock me. The story would then ratchet up the body horror even more. Also, I always feel like I need to mention this when this comes up in like a book or something. The most disturbing parts were not the scenes of human suffering, but actually it was animal cruelty. Those scenes were so tough to handle. When you're sort of reading something and you kind of pull in a face as you read it, it's the fact like, my wife was going to me, what is going on? You all right? And I was just like, what? It was horrible. For me, it was worth it, getting through those parts because although that was intense, I enjoyed it overall. The funny thing is, one of the criticisms that I'd heard about this book before reading it, I think a few people had mentioned it in the comments to me, they said that the characters and the dialogue felt a bit juvenile, but honestly, for me, that wasn't like a big thing. The characters, for the most part, in this book are teenage boys, and teenage boys are crude and immature. I used to be one, and they talk about silly things like which celebrity has the better body, and who would win in a fight between a shark and a zombie. These sort of silly conversations that boys have. It felt to me like realistic teenage banter. And actually, I would say the opposite. If they had been acting really mature and serious, and talking about things like mortgage rates and the impact of the impact on the EU that Brexit had, and things like that, I would have felt like that was out of place. These are young boys. They're idiots. And so they're having idiotic conversations. I thought the dialogue was good. Also very similar to Carrie that I mentioned earlier. It had an epistolary element to it, news articles, interviews that documented what happens on the island. So it kind of jumps back and forth in that way. Yeah, definitely reminded me of Carrie by Stephen King. And I think that that's no surprise because I'm pretty sure Nick Cutter said that he was inspired by Carrie. So yeah. Next up is Come Closer by Sarah Gran. I read this unsettling little novella in one sitting. It centers around Amanda, who is this successful architect. Her life takes like a really dark turn when a demon disguised as someone from her past gradually begins to take over every element of her existence. We're talking about her relationships, her job, her hobbies, her interests. It sort of seeps into every area of her life. And the way that this story escalates, I think is well done. It starts with like little small disruptions, sort of noises that she hears, like knocking on the door. Sorry, knocking on the ceiling. It's kind of like, what's this? Little disruptions slowly start to build into more disturbing and twisted moments. I don't know what I'm doing with my hand. It's like I'm sort of casting a little spell on you. Uh, what am I doing? I'm just like this. Like, yeah, Amanda starts to take actions and do things which are way out of character. And so she starts to question her own sanity, like, what is going on with me? Why am I doing these things? Why do I have these urges? She's having these strange dreams as well. And I think as possession stories go, this is a good one. It feels disturbingly believable, I would say. The author keeps you guessing about what's real and what's imagined on Amanda's part. I'd say if I had one wish or just one little wish as a fan, it would have been that we spent more time with Amanda before the possession began. Seeing more of her life beforehand, I think would have added a bit more depth to the tragedy of what's being pulled away from her piece by piece, sort of seeing the thing that she's losing. Because the possession happens kind of early on. I know it's difficult because, like I say, it's such a short little book. You can't spend like this much of the book building up and then nothing happens until here. I get it, but still, I think it just like a little bit extra at the beginning of her life before would have made me feel it a bit more. Do you know what I mean? Speaking of which, another possession book, maybe the most famous possession book of all time, that actually did spend a lot of time building up to the moment of the possession is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. Absolutely, I think one of the scariest books I've ever read. I had seen the movie beforehand, but that didn't change how much I enjoyed this book. The story follows a mother, Chris, who's trying to save her daughter, Reagan, as she's gradually overtaken by this demonic possession. And what I think struck me most about this was like the realistic tone. Right, I'm not someone that believes in demonic possessions or ghosts and stuff like that. I feel like if you do believe in that stuff, then this book will be even scarier for you. So yeah, it's kind of unusual for me to describe a supernatural book as grounded, but yeah, I think just the way it was told and the tone that it had, and I also appreciated that Chris, the mother, doesn't immediately turn to the supernatural for answers. She does what I would do. If I was in her shoes, and she just exhausts every other option first, going to get medical tests, x-rays, MRI scans, goes to psychiatrists. And by the time she turns to the priests, it feels like this is a true last resort for a desperate mother who just loves her child so much. And as I mentioned, one of the really great things about this book is the slow build up so that we get to spend time with Reagan and Chris as they're, going to the movies together and having dinner and enjoying each other's company. And we get to see Reagan as this lovely little girl. And so when it comes time to her, that she is possessed and she starts to do and say these sort of grotesque things that a child would never do or say, it's just so shocking and so horrifying. Yeah, I mean, William Peter Blatty, he really didn't hold back when it came to the actions of Reagan or the demon that's really inside of her. It was truly shocking. There were moments where I was thinking to myself, did this happen in the film? Did this happen in the film? I can't remember. But no wonder people were trying to get this banned like back in the 70s, or I think it was like the 70s when it came out. I was like, wow, this is so crazy. And I think it would have been easy for the author to kind of go, this is a kid we're talking about. Maybe we should hold back a little bit. But that would have been, in my opinion, inauthentic. We're talking about a demon. We're talking about pure evil, you know, just condensed inside this child. And so, yeah, I think it would have been a sign of timidity on behalf of the author if he just didn't say, "Do you know what? I'm going for it." I'm glad he did, even though it was just appalling, you know? Ooh. This next book was scary for a whole other reason. It's A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. It starts off the opening scene with a demon that uh, is very different to the demon in The Exorcist. It feels as though this demon is a character from a Monty Python sketch, honestly. I was actually laughing at the dark and absurd humor and the reasoning of this demon, who, you know, just seems to be like a reasonable chap doing his job. So the story follows a man who dies and ends up in a version of hell that's inspired by Jorge Luis Borges's The Library of Babel. And he is condemned to search a seemingly endless library for one book that holds his life story before he's released into heaven. And the story kind of dives into existential questions and the nature of eternity and the human need for connection that's all kind of wrapped up into this mixture of horror and dark comedy. I think the thing that impressed me so much about this book is how it explored the nature of sort of like infinity, you know, but not quite infinity, because the maddening thing about this situation that the main character finds himself in is that he has to find this book, right, that has the his whole life story without any errors, right? So he's looking through and he's thinking to himself, oh, you know, this might take years. This might take 10 years before I find this, because I don't know, there's like millions and millions of books. But what he doesn't realize is that, no, man, this isn't going to take 10 years. You're dreaming if you think it's going to take 10 years, because what this library consists of is every book that could potentially exist. So there is a book that is all A's, and there is a book that is all B's, and there is a book that is all A's and then a B at the end, and then all A's and two B's at the end. And it's just every combination of letters within a certain number of pages that could potentially exist, right? And so it's almost infinite, but it's kind of maddening because it's not infinite. If you looked at every single book, you would eventually find it. You would find it. And that is what is just sort of driving these characters insane. It's really such a unique version of hell that is torturous in a way that I had never even imagined before. And so, yeah, it was just really interesting to read. It's another one of those little shorties. I would recommend it. I enjoyed it. Next book is The Hellbound Heart. This is the novel behind Hellraiser. This was a fresh read for me because I had never seen the movie, unlike The Exorcist, where I'd seen the movie. I think it came up on a list of like the most terrifying reads that's ever been written, and I would pretty much agree with that. There's a pretty consistent level of horror, very rarely lets up. The story starts with Frank, who is this character consumed by a need to experience pleasure beyond what this world can offer to him. And his hunger kind of drives him to seek sensations that are beyond the mortal realm. And that's when the Cenobites come into the picture, and these are demons that promise Frank intense sensations. And then Frank tells him, do you know what? I'm in. Sign me up. Give me everything you got. but he realizes, oh, this is a mistake. And he's in over his head because now every single sensation that he feels is heightened to the nth degree. And so every touch, every blink, every movement, everything that he can feel is just up by 1,000%, and it traps him in this nightmare realm with these demons. And none of what I've said so far is a spoiler, because this all happens in the first couple of pages. The story kind of explores that classic adage, be careful what you wish for. And also, I don't know if this was just me, but it felt as though there was a little touch of A Midsummer Night's Dream, because there's a bit of a love square going on, and the characters find themselves tangled in this web where each of them are sabotaging the others, and there's this mystical realm that exists in the background that's just interfering and toying with their lives. I don't know if this was an intentional thing, but yeah, I just kept thinking, oh, this is like a really dark version of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Yeah, definitely creepy. The story is basically Frank trying to get back into our world with the help of the people that he knows in this world. You can't exactly say that he is a protagonist. There's multiple characters. The book is told from multiple perspectives. So yeah, you're not exactly rooting for him, but yeah, you're interested in whether or not he can do it, whether or not he can get back. And then the next book that I read in the month of October was Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. I went into this book just really looking forward to that vivid Ray Bradbury writing style. It's what he's famous for, and kind of mixed in with some cozy autumnal vibes, and that is exactly what I got. Reading Bradbury is really like reading poetry, I think, rather than reading a novel. Whether or not you like the book, I think, relies heavily on how important atmosphere and tone is to you. For example, this is one of the passages that I actually really liked, and this one is describing how something is a little bit off with the carnival that rolls into town. A carnival should be all growls, roars, like timberlands stacked, bundled, rolled and crashed, great explosions of lion dust, men ablaze with working anger, pop bottles jangling, horse buckles shivering, engines and elephants in full stampede through rains of sweat, while zebras neighed and trembled like cage trapped in cage. But this was like old movies, the silent theatre haunted with black and white ghosts, silvery mouths opening to let moonlight smoke out, gestures made in silence so hushed you could hear the wind fizz the hair on your cheeks. Yeah, I really enjoyed that little description, but honestly, sometimes when I was reading this book, it felt like I needed a kind of cryptic decoder to break down the text. The language is beautiful, but I found myself just rereading sections just to keep track of the story and what just happened. And for me, unfortunately, that broke the immersion a little bit. Maybe it's just me, but after glancing at other Goodreads reviews, it seemed like I wasn't alone in this sentiment. Here's another actually example of this is prose that I didn't really like, and here in this section, Will, one of the main characters, is sort of like describing why he likes to listen to his dad, because he thinks that his dad is a kind of great authority figure, and he's very authentic in the way that he speaks, right? So this is how that sentiment is described. There was a thing in Dad's voice, up, over, down, easy as a hand winging soft in the air, like a white bird describing flight patterns, made the ear want to follow and the mind's eye to see. And the odd thing in Dad's voice was the sound truth makes being said, the sound of truth in a wild roving land of city or plain country lies with... Sorry. See, I'm getting a bit lost here. The sound of truth in a wild roving land of city or plain country lies will spell any boy. Many nights Will drowsed this way, his senses like stopped clocks, long before that singing voice was still. Dad's voice was a midnight school teaching deep fathom hours, and the subject was life. So, yeah, with that, that's pretty dense, man. Pretty purple prose. And of course, it's beautiful. You can't deny that it's beautiful. Yeah, it was just a little bit distracting from what was happening. So I think you need to go, when you read Bradbury, you need to go in with the right expectations. Yeah, obviously, I was looking forward to the prose, but it was, even for me, that was kind of going into it with that expectation. I wasn't expecting that heavy of or that dense of prose. And so, yeah, that's just a me problem, though. You know, a lot of people absolutely love this book, and I feel like for a lot of people, this book is special because maybe they read it when they were younger, and so it has that kind of Halloween vibe, that nostalgia from the fall season when they were younger, when they were going to the carnival themselves as children, you know, and when they return to this book, it has that nostalgia attached to it. A little bit like me and a Christmas Carol. Whenever I read it, I'm imagining Christmas and my childhood and all that kind of thing. And that's why I cry every time I read it. Yeah, so those were the books that I read in the month of October. Let's talk about what was my least favorite book in the month of October. Oh, I'm just going to quickly mumble this so people don't get too annoyed with me. My least favorite book in October was Something Wicked This Way Comes. And it was just because, you know, I just feel like some writers are known for their stories, you know, for their storytelling ability, and some writers are known for their style and the beauty of their prose and the kind of lushness of the language that they use. And in my opinion, Ray Bradbury falls in the latter category. Whereas I think the most important things to me are, number one, characters, number two, plot, and then number three, dialogue. Probably in that order. And then after that comes prose. And this was just all about the prose, you know. But what was my most favorite book of the month? There's a couple of really solid contenders. Like I said, I really enjoyed A Short Stay in Hell. Which, you know, during spooky season wasn't so much scary as it was unsettling and overwhelming in its concept. Just a, you know, fascinating idea. I felt like the troupe was this visceral journey just through, you know, graphic depictions of body horror. Really stuck with me since. But in the end of it all, I think I'm going to have to go with the best book that I read in the month of October, and that is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. I think there's just a reason that this book is so well known. Slow burn, the character development, Father Cara struggling with his faith. It's a wild book, and I thought it was genuinely scary, which is exactly what I wanted for the month of October. But here's the big question. Do any of these books make it into my top 10 reads of 2024? Let's bring down the leaderboard and take a look at the current top 10. So here is the top 10 as it currently stands. In at number 10, you've got Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, just hanging on by its fingertips there. Then you've got The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks. In 8th place, you've got Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Then Hyperion by Dan Simmons, great sci-fi classic there. Then the second entry by Joe Abercrombie, which is The Heroes. And in the top 5, you've got Misery by Stephen King, Death of a Salesman by Herman Melville, The Dark Forest by Liu Cixin. Then another Stephen King, 11/22/63, just an absolute banger of a book. And then the best book that I've read so far this year is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I can tell you that this month I am going to add one book to the top 10 list. And so unfortunately, that does mean that we are going to lose Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. Let's load up the book canon. So let's take a look at the new top 10 for 2024 and see how that's changed things. With only a couple of months left now. And as you can see, The Exorcist has jumped all the way up to number 7. It's a good, healthy spot. I think it might hold on to a top 10 spot with only 2 more months left. So let's just really quickly talk about what I've been recording myself. If you didn't know, I'm a voice actor, and I actually recorded 2 audiobooks in the month of October. Been really busy this month, actually. So I completed the War of the 12 series by Alex Robbins, and it was very emotional for me. I've been recording these books over the course of the last couple of years, and this is a fantasy series of 4 books, and it's set in a world where you've got 12 ancient demigod warriors that were once all united to banish evil underground into these pits, and now 400 years later, the last of their order, these Knights of the 12, they now guard the pits where that old evil is threatening to resurface. I really enjoyed recording these 4 books and finishing up. Like I say, it was emotional, saying goodbye to the characters. There's a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of backstabbing going on amidst the chaos of these kind of epic battle scenes. And I had a lot of fun with the characters to play out. And then I also recorded Adella of the Campos. This is the first book in the Legends of Andalin series, and this is a fantasy adventure about a character named Adella. She's like a member of this world's aristocracy, and she has her whole life go up in flames, literally, when her town is attacked, when her parents are away on an important kind of mission. Her brother has gone missing, and so she has to ride out into the wild to go and find him. And she ends up teaming up with Cole, who is this kind of tough as nails mercenary who was orphaned at a young age, and together they get tangled in this like crazy chase across multiple countries and across oceans. It involves this powerful ancient artifact and the other people that might be chasing after the artifact. There's pirates involved, there's sea serpents involved. Real classic adventure story. And in this book, half of the voices that I performed as are American accents. So the author, A.M. Portman, requested that the Saunians sound like Americans to kind of differentiate the 2 nationalities, right? You've got the Valenians, which all sound English, and then you've got the Saunians, which all sound American. So that was fun and different for me to do as well. I also recorded a H.P. Lovecraft short story for a YouTube channel, but I think I'll talk about that next month because I don't think it's out yet. I think they need to add the visuals to the video. So yeah, that was the month of October, and now we move into November. And as always, I'm going to spin the wheel to find out what I'm going to be reading this coming month. If you'd like to see me spin this wheel, look, you see some of the titles that are on here. If you'd like to see me spin this wheel and find out what I'm going to be reading in the month of November, then you can click up here. Thanks so much for watching the video. Really appreciate it. Happy reading. Have a good one.